right. Well, after a whole lot of fun and travail that is called trying to set up two people into one frame of a video, I am really, really pleased, and I know we're going to have a really fabulous conversation. I am with two composers, two collaborative composers, I guess, kind of. They're collaborating on a CD anyway that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, Allan Crossman.
A side and B side.
Yeah.
By the way, Allan, this is so horrible. Is it Crossman or Crossman? It's like potato.
Crossman, like a cross, yeah, cross.
Thank you. So now I begin the intro again. Sorry, no editing. We are talking to Allan Crossman, who is in the checkered, I guess. What shirt? The brown shirt, the brownish shirt.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of orangey brown. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And John G. Bilotta. I hope I'm getting your Italian. I presume name.
Right.
Another composer with a very, very interesting story, and we're talking about their CD. It came out this year. The Life Before Us is the name of the CD. It's released by Navona Records, and I'm going to have all the whistles and flags up at your page at performingartsreview.net so that folks can have a look and buy the CD, and more importantly, really get to know who you two are and what you're up to. That's really what it's about. Let me just quickly run through, and then I'll have to ask you more, okay, about your CVs,
Sure.
okay? John Bilotta is the guy that, and you're not the first, but it always intrigues me to learn of a composer who received his bachelor's and master's degree at UC Berkeley in psychology. I don't know whether to run away or to embrace you, but as always, I want to know how that gets into music. We're going to go there, and you're on the executive committee for the Society of Composers. Can't get any better than that. And now you're also an editor. That's scary for me. Okay. Whereas Allan Crossman has, it's like Professor Emeritus, Concordia University in Montreal, San Francisco. It's just, it's nice and clean and beautiful and wonderful. So now it's my pleasure to ask you both to iterate, I guess, on what I've just babbled. May we start with Allan Crossman, please? Can you give me just kind of a little overview of your career to date?
Sure. So music found me when I was very young. Played the piano badly, but I did get better, and then realized maybe I could write some of what I was playing, or in the style of that. So the first two pieces at the age of about 11 sounded just like the Grieg Piano Concerto, just because that's what we had around the house. And I went from there and then went to college at University of Pennsylvania in music, graduate studies, composers George Rochberg, George Crumb.
Yeah, drop another couple of names, will you?
Notable composers, very interesting working with them.
Yeah,
Sorry?
Well, I was making a joke that probably was blurred out, but something about drop a few more names while you're at it. I saw that on on your resume, and I thought,
Well, I mentioned it because they were influential, especially Rochberg. I happened to work with him in the middle '60s at a time where he was undergoing quite a change stylistically and personally, and so on. So it was interesting, deep, intense, and so on.
And I hope I'm not going to tilt the bull to any, but I remember something about the '70s when there was quite a lot of self-examination among some of the major composers, and styles changed a bit, among some. So that was a very interesting,
That's right.
A pivotal moment in music. Okay, John Bilotta, it's your turn. I need to know what's going on. How did your life get the way it is, and from where? Remember, everybody, a little closer. Come on, a little closer together, please.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
One shoulder. Just to be safe. Okay. Go.
So
John.
my family's originally from Waterbury, Connecticut, and my father was an airline pilot, so we lived all over the country.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And any case, I developed an interest in music at a fairly young age. Coming from an Italian family, it was mandatory. I had to learn to play the accordion, so that started in the 5th grade. And by about the 7th grade, when I was around 12, I really had a huge dose of classical music in school. They assigned us to a music appreciation class. And I finally got to hear a lot of composers I didn't know, particularly Sibelius really stood out at the time. And I decided, hey, it might be fun to try writing my own music as well. So that's when I started. And by eighth grade, my English teacher had arranged for the music students to perform a piece I'd written for 4 pianos. It was kind of an odd combination, but I thought, what the heck, I'm going to try 4 pianos, and they had 4 pianos. So that was my first performance ever, and I enjoyed it enormously, and continued to study music on my own all the way up to and including college. When I got to college, I took a lot of music classes, but I majored in psychology because it was always in the back of my head this nagging idea that I need to earn a living, and I wasn't convinced I could do it composing. So, so I went ahead and I got the degrees in psychology, and that included getting an enormous amount of experience in statistics because math was one of my strong suits. And as a result, the 2 days after I graduated, I was snapped up by companies at a time when in San Francisco, corporations were getting their first computers, and they wanted people who knew statistics, math, and had at least 1 semester of programming, which I had taken along the way. And next thing I knew, I was part of the information technology industry at its very beginnings. I was writing applications for the phone company, for banks that had never computerized anything before. And it was exciting, and you could make an income. That was the goal. And I just continued working on music on the side. Eventually, after I'd spent quite a few years in that field, I was comfortable enough that I could stop working and just concentrate on music. So that's what I have done for maybe the past almost 20 years.
Well, as I have said a couple of times, you're not alone, and it always amazes me in the interviews I do with composers in particular who have a similar story, work many, many years, and then at a certain point have the capability or just make the decision to, hey, let me do what my heart loves the most. And for the rest of us, we just struggle day in and day out. No, that's just me. I know, I'm a freelancer, so it's always like, anyway.
Right.
But I wouldn't have it any other way, as I'm sure you can imagine, and it's been an incredible life and continues to be. I love my art form.
Right.
Okay.
Listen, it's interesting. I'll just add another comment. It's interesting that in all the corporations I worked at and during those years, I was surrounded by musicians. So many other employees, even at the highest executive level, were aspiring singers or performers or performed in groups. And we're not talking about garage bands. I'm talking about classical music. And I was quite impressed at the number of people I worked with who had such thorough musical backgrounds.
Very impressive, and I know very well what you're speaking of. So there's an upside to this. But by the way, I too remember once upon a time, 7th grade, 1960, music appreciation class. All we did was listen to classical music. I was already hooked, but the point is, those were the days that are no more. And then we wonder why, among other illiteracies, the American public is so.
In fact, I was in 7th grade in 1960 as well. So it was.
Oh, really? Oh, we're the same age. Wonderful. Okay, with Allan's been just sitting there, trying not to nod off.
I didn't know some of the things about this.
What is your perspective? I think I actually. Oh, sorry.
1960, so that was.
What was that?
I graduated from high school in 1960, so 60 was another seminal year for myself as well.
And by the way, things changed, I think, fairly dramatically in the 60s. I'm speaking of my brother was a graduate of high school in 1960, and I remember the petticoats and that whole thing, the loose clothing and rampant virginity, we think, maybe, and so on. But it did change, as we all know, in the 60s. All right. I'm going to move on a little bit because it's. Did I ask how you actually met? Have I asked that one yet? How you finally got together?
Maybe the short version. We met probably on stage at a Kurt Weill review, doing selections from the musical theater of Kurt Weill,
Right.
which a group called Goat Hall Theater Company does in San Francisco and has done for many years. And I had worked with them for 20 years, I think, before I met John.
Yeah.
So they had done some of my own music theater scores, and also I was their happy pianist playing da 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 da, you know. And it was great. They're terrific folks, and they are on their way for another year.
So, and there you were, John, hopefully making a little money, or is that amateur theater? That was the Happy Go.
I was kind of a volunteer. I was part of that production because it was called Songs of the Sea, I think, or something of the sort, and they wanted an accordionist, and so I had to drag my accordion out of 30 years in the closet and practice up. In fact, actually, the main reason that I had been pulled in is, at one point, prior to that, a few years before that, actually, Goat Hall had produced my first little chamber opera called Quantum Mechanic. And then I started getting involved in their activities, and when it came time to do the Kurt Weill, they needed all of these transpositions of songs for various singers. So there I am on Sibelius, the computer program, redoing the scores to get them in the right key.
You did a great job.
Oh, well, thank you.
Because there's such a wide range of singers that you have to adjust the key and the range.
How Mozartian can it get in that? Of course, everything was written to accommodate whoever was in. Well, give me some obscure town.
That's right.
And that sailor cap of yours, I'll never forget it. He wore it kind of at a tilt, and so he's sitting there playing
the accordion. Yeah.
You know, it was heaven. It was great.
Well, this leads me to another question that I thought was going to be pretty profound, but I don't think so. I think you've just deflated all of my profundity. But it's this. I'm thinking of. I was going to mention. I had a wonderful time with the American composer Ned Rorem in my youth in the early 70s in Seattle. I brought the whole Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, the whole kit and caboodle of them up for a couple of years. Promptly went broke. But the point is, Ned Rorem said, and it really hit me very strongly. He said Americans need to look at their own culture, their own literature. That's leading to your CD with so many songs on it by both of you, but for inspiration and so I kind of wanted to ask the question of, especially of Allan, because you're a theater music director and composer. You have to, as with the Lorca songs and music for Lorca, you have to kind of see the whole large world. But John, do you have any thoughts about this? It sounds almost like, only Romans can understand Roman music or write Roman music. Well, so it can be absurd, but go ahead.
No, I have very Catholic tastes in literature. What I look for in a text to set has very little to do with its point of origin and a great deal to do with its structure and its musicality. So on this CD, for example, I've set some short poems of Yeats, a series of Elizabethan songs, two American poets, Millay and Sandburg, and then there's an aria from an opera that I worked on. Actually, right now I'm working on a little theater piece on Charlotte Bronte, using her letters as the texts for the piece. And then I did do American Poets in a new piece a year ago called The League of Minor Characters, and it's poems by Kathleen Flanagan and Ron Kurtke, and they're set in a cabaret style. Classical music, operatic voices, but it's all cabaret emotion, and it's a fun piece.
So I think it sounds to me as though, indeed, my question was not all that deep and profound, and I think both of you, it's your turn, Allan. I have a feeling are both in agreement that it really doesn't matter, and
right,
that it shouldn't. It's about the content.
Certain ways.
Right.
The singers that I've worked with often have been in both directions: concert singers, vocalists, and music theater. So all of the singers the two singers that I used for this album have been in theater, and I know them from music theater. Megan Stetson is well known internationally for theater productions, and not just straight, classical music recitals. Richard Mix, the bass, has been in opera and cabaret and so on. And actually, he's been in some of the cabaret shows that I've written as well. So I know that their range of not just vocal range, but their expressive range, what they do with their faces. I mean, they act out the piece in a certain way without stalking the stage. And I love that expressiveness. I didn't want just a straight kind of classical song going on. So, if there could be a video as well as an audio of this album that we're talking about, The Life Before Us, that would be ideal, because on stage, as I've seen them do it, not just the live recording for this album, but on stage and other productions. That's what I want for my songs. I want on your kind of expression.
A couple things.
Straight out.
A couple of things.
So, I got it. They're terrific. Yeah.
So just a couple of things. I think if I just can defend Ned Rorm a little bit, I think what he was saying, and maybe I'm sure you'll agree with me, there is such a wealth of American literature and American art, and as you witness on the CD, for example, the Pollock piece, or image. What beautiful imagery, by the way, incredible imagery in that piece. But I think that's really what he was trying to say was, young man, look at your own country and its heritage first. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, actually, and I agree with him that we do need to look at our own. I read an enormous amount of poetry, particularly American poetry. Not all of it suitable for me, anyway, to set to music, but I'm always looking for things that I can. But, for example, the second opera we did was Trifles, which is the play by Susan Glaspell, the one-act play about the murder in Nebraska. And we actually read that play in high school. And as a high school junior reading the play, I said to myself, hey, this is going to make a great opera someday. And I'll just have to wait till I'm skilled enough to actually write it. So we finally did, and it's had a lot of performances. I'm very happy with it. But I loved it because it was a very, very American story. In many ways. And,
is this the Cutler murder in Nebraska? The family that was murdered? Is this in cold blood? No.
No. It's much older than that. 1901. A farm wife is accused of murdering her abusive husband in his sleep, and Susan Glaspell was the reporter covering the story at the time. She later married and moved out east and was part of the Provincetown Players, and one of the first things she was asked for was a short one-act play. So she wrote a fictional version of that murder story called Trifles. Sometimes it was also published as a short story called A Jury of Her Peers. I believe I've read several times, it's the most frequently performed one-act play written by an American.
Let alone an American woman.
And an American woman to boot.
By the way, I'm going to ask you once again if you could cuddle a little bit more. I'm just fearful I'm going to lose half your faces.
Yeah, we're feeling.
So just kind of remember. And Allan, quit leaning for your pipe or whatever it is you're going for over there. No, forgive me, it's your whiskey sour. I forgot it's that time.
That's it. That's me. Yeah, right.
Okay, I've got a here's another one that'll probably fall flat, but I saw in John's notes. Mm-hmm. About the Yeats songs. You use the term the Yeats poems are bitonal or atonal, and
I meant settings, the musical settings. Yeah.
You were not speaking of the poems themselves.
Not of the poetry, of the music.
But that's an intriguing idea.
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea. But I should have.
In other words, I thought I was onto something, and I wasn't at all. But the idea of whether you found somewhere in those poems some kind of bitonality, if you will, in terms of words.
No, that's bad proofreading. I think I should have caught that.
Using early poems, Elizabethan poems, medieval poems, setting it to modern music. I'm a sucker for that. It's really terrific, or vice versa. New poems, kind of beat poems, but doing it in a Baroque style of music and so on, where you're mixing and matching periods of time. I mean, after all, if we're open composers, then everything is grist for the mill. Everything is
Right.
material, as well as combinations that you find. So, you know, whenever there's an opportunity to do that, what it does is it brings a timelessness or a timefulness to the whole.
Well put.
You know, you're cutting across these organized categories, centuries, periods, you know, genres and so on, and you're finding new life in their combinations. So for me, I'm in.
And this reminds me also of the CD. It really covers a pretty wide span.
It does.
Of your music making of really about 50 years, as many as a couple
That's
of
right.
works.
Yeah,
in
the earliest.
70s.
Yeah, Deep in the Heavens was written in 1966.
Oh, that early. I had
That's
forgotten that. Wow.
2.5 years old at the time. And so, you know, I was a college person. I was discovering international poetry, and more advanced musically, I heard the poetry in a certain musical way. I wasn't just reading the poetry. So I had a course in poetry in college, but it immediately took root in a musical way for me. So yes, the earliest song was 66, and the latest song, which is My Entire Life Before Me, the last of my 10 songs on the CD, was written just a couple of years ago, a few years ago, and the poem was by an old friend, Lewis Phillips, a New York poet. Recent.
Yeah,
as well.
That's what I found so interesting. A big span is covered, and it's very
and
interesting.
Gratifyingly, I have to say that some people who heard the album said, "We love those songs, and my goodness, you've written so much in the last couple of years." I said, "That's wonderful to hear, because you can't tell when I wrote them." They said, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
I said, "My oldest song was 50 years ago, and it's all the way up to just a couple of." They said, "No, we hear threads, we hear motifs, we hear style carrying through." I was thrilled.
Yeah, and by the way, that's very perceptive of them, because I presume, I mean, most all composers, I'm going to get in trouble here, but there's some little something that just is there that you can, where you, with time, the listeners can just spot it. It's not necessarily deliberate at all, frankly, so subconscious or something, but that's what.
I know what was common to all the music that I write, whether it's orchestral or vocal, even theater stuff. But hearing it from an audience member, a thrill.
That's a win-win. Yeah. By the way, you now lead me to this question, another loaded one. I hope this one will take flight. I'm going to deliberately ask you, because I find you are, the two of you, as two different composers. First of all, getting together, and what kind of fight was it? Rochambeau or Beau or whatever, to decide who, where, what in terms of placement? Is there any particular sensibility to the placement of the songs on the CD? You know what I mean? The chronology of it. Anything at all? I'm just curious. I always ask that question.
I think part of it was left up to Parma, you know, recordings.
Yeah, they did ask us if we had suggestions, and there were certain pieces of mine that I thought should be separated on the disc, not immediately adjacent to each other, simply for the sake of flow on the disc as a whole. But we really left it up to them. I was actually quite surprised at the ordering they came up with. It worked really well.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been my first guess on how to do it, because one of the difficulties is we have both vocal music and piano music.
Yeah.
Well, they are colleagues, I think, really. The people at Parma, I hear this over and over again from everybody. By the way, again, if I can just urge you to get closer together, so I don't have to scrap the whole thing. Okay. All right. Just remember, come on.
They're very good about consulting with their composers.
Yes.
Did they also choose the cover art, or did you have some idea of the cover art for the CD?
They actually came up with the proposal, and we bounced it back and forth with them quite a few times in order to get we liked the concept, but not necessarily the very first version we saw. And so they worked on it over and over. We were very pleased with it. The image, yeah.
Nice.
Well, the title is based on the last of the 10 songs of mine, My Entire Life Before Me.
Right.
And I was talking to John about that when they proposed come up with a title. And so I was looking for something that could be spun a little bit on one of the song titles or one of the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
there would be a reference
Right.
to something on the CD.
It was I really liked.
Sure
that.
enough,
Yeah, it was
My
good.
Entire Life Before Me became The Life Before Us.
Mm-hmm.
And before means previously or before us, meaning we're looking out at it as though in the future from a promontory.
Mhm.
There it is before us and also before us. So that was lovely.
Right. Yeah.
That we actually got that
I
double
really
meaning
liked
out
the
of that.
title.
It opened it up.
Well, of course you would, John. You're a psychologist. I mean, because that is one of those double entendre, before, that word before, and I put a fantasy in my own head that was something about, oh my God, they've had some horrible tragedy in this movie. Before I first listened to it, this is going to be all about it's some sort of looking forward to a new life. Never did consider before, as in the antecedent to. So it's very, very, very clever.
Well, we wanted it to be as open as possible in terms of reflection. The poets have reflected on their lives in the past and pre-flecting, could I say, instead of reflecting, it's pre-flecting, into the future.
Right.
And, so...
Yeah, the oldest poets on the album are from the Elizabethan period.
That's right.
Up to texts that were written in 2013.
That's right.
Rosetta Stone. So
once again, a very wide coverage of existence, cultural existence, really, in a way, and then also interpreted by you too. I'm starting to figure we should wind it down, but I just have to tease you with this one. So seldom I get this. It's a terrible thing, but you know what? I would love to, because you are two diverse composers. Mm-hmm. Could you do me the favor of describing each other's music? You see what I'm getting at? Who wants to go first? John, would you like to speak about Allan's music?
I'll talk about the vocal music first. I've always admired Allan's vocal music. I've heard not just these songs, but I've heard some other works of his, including the Ship Captain's Wife. Did I say that correctly?
The Log of the Skipper's Wife.
The Log of the Skipper's Wife, which is a beautiful piece. And Allan's style always sort of walks a line between a more tonal quality and a more advanced, complex harmonic material, and I find that fascinating. I love the way he does that, and I know that all of those settings, as I was listening to them one by one, was very distinctive and perfectly appropriate to the text, well chosen and very well crafted. The piano sonata that he provided I'd never heard before, but I was thrilled to hear it. It's a wonderful one.
Yeah. You mean Sonata Flux?
Thank you.
Yeah, I really like that.
Great pianist, boy.
And
can't beat that. Yeah, Case is a wonderful pianist.
Yeah.
We also worked with him through Goat Hall because he used to work as an accompanist for a lot of their shows.
Yep, it's a standard story in musical theater. The musician does everything, pretty much. Okay, Allan, it's your turn to describe.
Well, let me say, John, there's an overlap there with John's lyricality as a melodist. He really gets what a lovely, memorable tune is. And then there are layers based on the text, layers of emotion. There's a darkness where it needs to be, and there's a spectrum of color, and light, dark, intense, mild, all of the things we know about spectrum for expression, whether it's visual art or, and then writing in musical theater genre as he's done, I think carries over to some of the concert pieces. Yes. So we share that. I think we've noticed that in each other. Also, one thing about his instrumentation is, whether it's with a voice or whether purely instrumental, is it sounds like more instruments are playing.
That's bravo.
Voices the instruments in such a way that they build the overall resulting sound. There's a richness to it, I should say, and sometimes I'm surprised to see that it's a smaller ensemble, because he hits the sweet spots of these instruments both individually and
And that's a real
composite, and that's not easy to do.
no, that's a real mastery of the craft. I can see the sun is setting on my face here through the slots. It's crazy. If I put them down too low, then I'm suddenly in darkness, and what can I do? Jump up and fix it. So we'll wind it down just to save me the disgrace of this invading sunshine. But thank you very, very much. That was a wonderful
big pleasure.
Wonderful exchange.
Perfect.
Thanks again for giving me some time, and I'm going to, of course, put this video interview up up on your page. It has all the goodies about buying and so on, and I'll follow up with 3-4 paragraphs. I'm trying to get down from my novellas that I used to write. I just don't have the time anymore for that, but I'll try and find some juicies for you. Okay? Thanks very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.